We want no more segregation. We will accept no more discussion of segregation. And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
I speak not for myself, but for those without voice can be heard. Those who have fought for their rights. Their right to live in peace.
Hello and welcome to Rainbow Shelter News. I am the host, Ozma in the Dark, and I am here to give you the news I figured I could cover in a 3-hour time period. I do this live on Twitch, but also this will be uploaded to YouTube tomorrow, so you can always check it out tomorrow. It's gonna stay up there, and then you don't have to watch me play League of Legends or hang out or whatever. So, on to the news. We're starting with the grimmer of subjects. So, decades-old cold case murder of trans sex worker could be linked to a serial killer. Which doesn't surprise me because serial killers oftentimes target marginalized groups. It's either marginalized groups or it's random people. Anyways, the lead has been revealed in the decades-old cold case of trans woman Adele Bailey found dead at the bottom of a mine shaft. The detectives were reportedly ignoring the tip-off at the time, because of course they did. Bailey, a trans woman and sex worker living near Melbourne, Australia, went missing in 1978. In 1995, 17 years later, her body was discovered by two men exploring the quote-unquote Jack of Clubs mineshaft in the tiny Victoria town of Bonnie Doon. Officers were given a tip-off linking Adele Bailey's death to serial killer Bendali Debs. In 1995, after her body was discovered, Bailey's friend spoke to police on 2 consecutive days, tipping them off to a possible connection with Debs. At the time, he had not been arrested, but Debs, now 68, would go on to be sentenced in 2003 to 4 consecutive life sentences plus 27 years without parole for the murder of 2 sex workers and 2 police officers in the 90s. But, it's good that that's getting some sort of recognition, even if it sucks that took so long. Trans woman known for her bright and sunny demeanor killed just weeks before her birthday. Maricela Castillo, a trans woman who had a quote-unquote bright and sunny demeanor, was shot and killed just weeks shy of her birthday celebrations. Castillo was killed early Friday when a man, on the 29th of July, when a man got out of a car she was in. When a man got out of a car she was in and shot her in the back as she walked down a street in North Shore neighborhood of East Houston, Texas. Man who has not been identified or arrested got back into the car and drove away. So yeah, that was just probably transphobia related and just awful and sad that someone would just get out of their car and kill someone. Police have said the trans woman found on the pavement in Detroit, Michigan was fatally shot and was thought to be the 22nd tragic murder of a trans person in the U.S. this year, that we know about. The woman who has not yet been identified was found on Monday after a neighbor reportedly discovered a body on the pavement near his home. Click on reported that the woman was found wrapped in a blanket at around 11 p.m. and that police determined the woman was shot multiple times. Witnesses reportedly told the outlet that they believe the woman jumped out of a vehicle and was chased while being shot at. The investigation is ongoing. The woman cannot be identified ahead of her autopsy being completed. The woman thought to be the 22nd trans person killed in the U.S. this year, just days after a senseless killing of Keisha Chanel Gator in Georgia, who was shot to death on the 20th of July. Obviously, there are potentially unreported ones, but yeah, there's been a lot of death this week. Trans woman killed in Houston, Milwaukee. So, first they mentioned the Castrokes. They're bringing up two of them. And then Toy Davis, a 34-year-old black woman who worked as a certified nursing assistant, was found dead on July 16th in Milwaukee. Houston, Milwaukee. Gotcha. I was thinking sometimes cities share the same names. Under suspicious circumstances. A few details have emerged about her death, but it's clear she was well loved by family and friends, the site notes. She was a member of the trans organization called Sisters Helping Each Other Battle Adversity, and recently shared her story on its Facebook page. She wrote that she felt her path was ordained by God and noted, "My transition has saved my life." So far this year, at least 25 trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming Americans have died by violent means. The true number is probably higher, since people are dead named, misgendered, etc. by media a lot. So, if you can't tell, I might be a basketball fangirl sometimes, and the sort of fangirl who does not keep up with games, but only geeks out over, like, one player. And that player is Steph Curry. But that's beside the point. NBA legend, civil rights hero Bill Russell dies at age 88. So, there's not much to say about that. It's awful that it sucks when famous people died. And similarly, they typoed the name. Michelle Nichols. Wait, why does this keep saying Michelle? Unless I'm mispronouncing the name. But the actress who played Uhura has died, and this is after she was in similar circumstances to Britney Spears, although less talked about. Her being in Star Trek changed a lot in terms of aspects of diversity, since that was always the point of the original Star Trek series, was humanity has come together. Her name is Nichelle, actually. Okay. My brain assumed it was Michelle because I attempted to auto-correct with my white brain and just didn't process people's actual names, which is awful. Uh, but the one I care about the most in terms of death, well, actually, I care about all of these deaths. But Albert Woodfox, ex-Black Panther who spent decades in solitary confinement, dies. Albert Woodfox, the former Black Panther who was held in solitary confinement for decades, has died of complications from COVID-19 at age 75. Woodfox was released 6 years ago after being held in solitary for 43 years. Solitary confinement for 43 years. Officials said Woodfox and two other men, Herman Wallace and Robert King, were kept in solitary because of their affiliation with the Black Panther Party, would rile up other people being held at Louisiana Penitentiary at Angola, a maximum security prison. The three men became known as the Angola Three. While serving time for armed robbery and assault, Woodfox was convicted for the death of prison guard Brent Miller in 1972. Others testified against Woodfox, saying he grabbed the guard from behind, while someone else stabbed Miller with a lawnmower blade and a hand-sharpened prison knife. The former Black Panther, who maintained his innocence, was placed in solitary confinement immediately after Miller's body was found in a prison dormitory. Federal courts later threw out two earlier convictions against Woodfox, citing one of the reasons as racial bias in selecting a grand jury foreman. At age 69, in 2016, Woodfox pleaded no contest to manslaughter and aggravated burglary. A judge then ordered his immediate release. Yeah, that's... Nobody should be held in solitary confinement for that many years. That's ridiculous. So... A black employee got the last laugh after being invited to a work retreat at a plantation with a quote-unquote period-appropriate theme. The employee, who shared his experience on Reddit, said he decided to go to the party dressed as an enslaved person to reflect the time period. As a lot of you already know, I had to attend a corporate retreat this weekend that happened to take place on a southern plantation in Alabama. There was a quote-unquote period-appropriate costume ball scheduled for the end of the trip, but they apparently forgot about me, their lone black employee. Hilarity ensued, he wrote on Reddit. He posted pictures of his outfit, which included a tan shirt, pants, and a straw hat. The employee decided to ditch the shoes and attend the party barefoot. In another picture, the employee was at the bottom of a staircase, and one of his white coworkers, dressed in a blue gown, was standing on the steps. I get the impression that many of the white people probably enjoyed this too much. Yeah, so, speaking of discrimination, police are 4 times more likely to stop a trans person for quote-unquote reasonable suspicion. About half the time trans people are stopped by police, they're stopped for reasonable suspicion alone instead of a specific violation or clearly unlawful behavior. A new draft report from the California Attorney General's office indicates trans people in the state are stopped by police at vastly different rates than cisgender people. The report is based on data reported from 58 of the state's largest law enforcement agencies and shows trans people were stopped because of quote-unquote reasonable suspicion alone instead of a specific violation or clearly unlawful behavior in nearly half the stops. For trans people, the proportion of quote-unquote reasonable suspicion stops was 44%, or 4 times the ratio for cisgender people. The data includes all people stopped by police, regardless of whether the officers were responding to a potential offense they observed or to call for service. California requires police departments to report the demographic data of every driver, bicyclist, or pedestrian they stop, including perceived race, gender, approximate age. The new state data shows that trans women are stopped due to an officer's reasonable suspicion in more than 45% of encounters when they're stopped in 2021. Trans men were stopped for the same reason 43% of the time. And I'm sure that reasonable suspicion is, these people don't look right around here. Interactions with police officers were also more likely to lead to more drastic outcomes, with trans people more likely to be searched, handcuffed, and arrested, and have lethal and non-lethal force used against them. Reasonable suspicion is a legal standard that requires officers to articulate why they believe a person is likely engaged in a crime. Probable cause, the standard required to arrest someone, has a higher bar. But yeah, it's in effect a way to enforce Western gender binary norms on appearance, that you will be punished if you're not a gender binary, or not gender binary in your appearance, they said. Policing of trans folks at these disparate rates has led advocates to argue it's a status crime. So, cisgender people, it's about 10% of the time, as opposed to like 44%. Out of 3.2 million stops, trans people account for 4,740. Yeah, this is its own mess. So, body cam footage catches Cincinnati police officer calling black teens racial slurs. I know this is a shock that Cincinnati police officers are racist. Officer Rose Valentino of the Cincinnati Police Department is being reprimanded after being caught calling a black teen the N-word on her body camera. Which is always gets major sus when police officers turn their body cam off, which I don't think they're supposed to do. In April 2022, Valentino was pulling into her police precinct when a group of cars blocked her way while parking near the city's high school to pick up students. Police body cam footage shows the agitated cop turning on her sirens, insisting the drivers move. As Valentina's sirens blare, a black teenager is seen walking by and giving the middle finger at her, which sets the officer off, WCPO reports. "You gotta move," Valentino said. Effing ridiculous. A-hole. Is she gonna effing just sit there, Valentino said. "Oh, I effing hate them so much. God, I hate this effing world," she says as she rolled her window down at the precinct gate. When she rolls her window back up, Valentino can be heard muttering effing N-word. She said, "I effing hate them." Valentino, who trains rookie Cincinnati police officers, is suspended during the disciplinary process. Honestly, she should be fired. That is reasonable suspicion to reasonable cause to suspect that she very much racially profiles people and causes harm to black communities. I'm sure it's a paid suspension as well. So, Florida. Good old Florida. And by good, I mean awful. Florida instructs schools to ignore federal protections for trans kids. So, if you haven't been paying attention to the news, there was federal. Well, I mean, I think there's still federal protection for trans kids, just in general. Although that'll likely be attacked by the Supreme Court. But Florida's Department of Education has instructed the state's public and private schools to ignore federal guidance on protecting trans students from discrimination. In a memo sent to school administrators on Thursday, Education Commissioner Manny Diaz Jr. said the new federal protections under Title IX are not binding law, do not create any new legal obligations, and should not be treated as governing law. The department will not stand idly by as federal agencies attempt to impose a sexual ideology on Florida's schools that risk the health, safety, and welfare of Florida students, the memo continues. God, these people make everything about sex. Jeez. Last month, the Biden administration proposed changes to the legal interpretation of Title IX, which would help prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The proposed changes mostly undo rollbacks of Title IX rights during the Trump administration, which is what Biden tends to do. Just move stuff back to what he believes the status quo is, to some degree. Diaz claims that allowing trans girls to use restrooms and locker rooms of their gender and to participate in school sports as their gender would jeopardize, quote-unquote, the safety and well-being of Florida students and risk violating Florida's law. In 2021, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill to ban trans girls from playing school sports. While Governor DeSantis and Commissioner Diaz are intent on weaponizing state agencies in their war against trans youth, the fact remains the U.S. Department of Education has said unequivocally that students are to be protected from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Equality Florida Press Secretary Brandon Wolf said in a statement. Florida Medical Board votes to ban kids' gender-affirming care. So the Florida Board of Medicine Friday took a first step towards banning gender-affirming care for trans youth. The board voted to consider guidelines proposed by the state's Surgeon General that reject standards of care endorsed by major medical associations. The Independent reports the action doesn't limit such care immediately, but starts the process of doing so. The decision from the governor-appointed boards initiates a formal rule-changing process that would deny trans youth from receiving such care and forcibly detransition them. The publication explains the process could take several months. That's usually how these things work. People, they wedge something in, a law in that they can use to force the other laws in. The guidance from Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo says people under 18 should not be prescribed puberty blockers or hormone treatment. Now, puberty blockers are, because this is, as usual, this does not just affect trans youth. Puberty blockers prevent certain life-threatening situations where someone experiences an early puberty, because early puberty oftentimes leads to other medical complications. And should not undergo gender-affirming surgery, and should not even transition socially. So it's essentially saying trans women shouldn't wear dresses, and men shouldn't wear dresses. It's essentially setting up for other laws that affect disabled people, as well as trans, non-conforming, and all that stuff. Ladapo has been controversial for these guidelines and other matters, with former colleagues in California disputing his claims about treating COVID-19 patients there. He has released proposed rules to implement his gender transition guidance. Obviously, they always say it's based on questionable evidence, no matter how much evidence is provided. We're looking at... So, puberty blockers is... there's at least 40 years of evidence for puberty blockers. In terms of use, because puberty blockers have been used for treating early puberty since the 80s. And then in terms of transitioning, there have been studies. The Nazis destroyed a lot of studies relating to transitioning, but there are studies from the 50s and beyond. So probably about 70 years of recent studies, both with regards to forms of gender-confirming surgery and all sorts of other stuff, along with the benefits. But yeah, sure. You know, transitioning has only been studied longer than polio, practically. Not longer, but like has been studied. Well, yeah, no, longer, because it's been studied before the polio vaccine. It's just some of that research was destroyed. Yeah. Florida's awful. So, because everything in Florida is awful, don't worry, Texas will be trying to beat Florida. So a school district slaps warning labels on books with LGBTQ characters. A school district in Florida has added parental warning labels to over 100 books, touching on everything from race to LGBTQ issues, including a children's book called Everywhere Babies. This advisory notice shall serve to inform you that this book has been identified by some community members as unsuitable for students. The label placed on the inside front cover of books in the Collier County Public School Libraries reads, "This book will also be identified in the Destiny system with the same notation. The decision as to whether this book is suitable or unsuitable shall be the decision of the parents, who have the right to oversee his or her child's education consistent with state law. These warning labels are like something you might see on a cigarette package, said Jonathan Friedman, director of free expression and education programs at PEN America. Penn America. They're treating it like a controlled, alarming substance. This is literature for young people. Dear God. Oh, Everywhere Babies, because in there's a picture of a man being affectionate with another man. You know, having an arm around him. Shocking. Yeah, it's awful. And Florida, DeSantis suspends state prosecutor over abortion law. Andrew Warren, an elected Democratic state attorney, has pledged not to enforce the U.S. state's 15-week abortion ban. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, scourge of America, has suspended a Democrat who was elected state prosecutor for vowing not to enforce the state's 15-week abortion ban and for supporting gender transitioning treatment for minors. DeSantis announced on Thursday the suspension of Hillsborough County State Attorney Andrew Warren in the Tampa Bay area, accusing the prosecutor of, quote-unquote, ignoring the law. Florida has imposed a 15-week abortion ban earlier this year, even before the United States Supreme Court revoked the federal constitutional right to the procedure. At a news conference on Thursday, DeSantis said local officials cannot have, quote-unquote, veto power over issues decided by the entire state. Quote-unquote, the Constitution of Florida has vested the veto power in the governor, not individual state attorneys. And so, when you flagrantly violate your oath of office, when you make yourself above the law, I am the law, sorry, you have violated your duty, you have neglected your duty, and you're displaying a lack of competence to be able to perform those duties, the Republican governor said. And so today we're suspending the state attorney, Andrew Warren, effective immediately. Democrats denounced the decision, saying that DeSantis, who is a possible candidate for 2024 U.S. presidential election, is subverting the will of voters who elected Warren. The governor's actions constitute an extreme abuse of power, a new low for DeSantis, who fails our great state with his mean-spirited, selfish, and fiscally irresponsible focus on his political ambitions alone, Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Castor said in a tweet. Yeah, it's... In June, Warren signed on a statement by dozens of prosecutors across the country vowing to refrain from prosecuting those who seek, provide, or support abortions. Warren's suspension comes amid an intensifying nationwide debate on abortion rights after the top U.S. courts overturned Roe v. Wade, a landmark 1973 decision that ensured a right to abortion. And obviously, Kansas voted against repealing abortion protections. And yeah, it's definitely not the will of the people to ban abortion. It's the will of certain very powerful conservative individuals in the country. So, Her business was targeted by right-wingers for hosting drag queens. Now the city is going after her. So, a bakery in Chicago area suburb has been the target of vandalism and harassment due to the planned family-friendly drag event that has now been ordered to stop hosting public events. Uprising Bakery and Cafe owner said that she received a letter from Village of Lake in the Hills officials threatening fines and the revocation, that might be right, of her business and liquor licenses if she continued to host events. I feel like this is discrimination and conspiracy to interfere with my business, the owner said. Unfortunately, when the attention waned from all the hate this week, they shifted gears and started blaming me after we were attacked by a known domestic terrorist who committed hate crimes against us just 1 week ago. The owner says she was first informed that her business was not zoned for entertainment purposes at a Thursday meeting, which she describes as, quote-unquote, very threatening. She says city officials also expressed concerns over public resources being used to protect Uprising Bakery after it was the target of a hate crime last month. This issue is about a business conducting activities it was never permitted to conduct, Village of Lake in the Hills officials said in a statement. This zoning designation prohibits entertainment in large part due to the close proximity to residential neighborhoods and shared tenant parking. In a letter to Village Attorney Bradford S. Stewart, the ACLU of Illinois accused the city of unconstitutional retaliation against Uprising Bakery. We dispute the letter's characterized of Uprising's programs as entertainment events that are prohibited in a B2 zoning district, writes senior staff attorney Rebecca K. Glenberg. Even if that characterization is correct, however, the village's sudden determination to enforce the code against Uprising or Ms. Sack based on the exercise of First Amendment rights constitutes unconstitutional retaliation. Yeah. So, because we can't have good stuff with disabled people, so new report shows 50% of Marylanders with disabilities face financial hardships. I'm surprised the number seems the percentage seems almost low to me. According to a new report from United Way of Central Maryland and United for Alice, only 16% of Maryland residents with disabilities were said to be in poverty in 2019. However, another 34% of persons living with a disability are members of the Alice community. According to the report, nearly 50% of Marylanders with a disability live in poverty when you combine the number of Alice residents with a disability and the number of Marylanders living in poverty with disability. Data from the report shows that roughly half of all Marylanders with disabilities have incomes that do not cover basic needs like housing, a healthcare plan, childcare, methods of transportation, or cell phone plans, meaning that they live under the Alice threshold. On the 32nd anniversary of the American with Disability Act, we see that residents with physical, mental, or emotional situations who are struggling financially are not only being undercounted, but underserved. Yeah, not much else to say about that. So, voters in Jamestown Township, Michigan, rejected a ballot measure during the primary elections earlier this week to renew a property tax that funds the local library. The tax pays for 84% of That's low. They aren't counting people who live with family or shared housing, probably. That might be the case. The tax base for 84% of Patmos Library's $245,000 yearly budget. The failed measure means that the library will run out of money at some point next year, Library Board President Larry Walton said. Earlier this year, a parent complained about Genderqueer, a memoir, Maya Kobabe's graphic novel about coming to terms with her identity as non-binary and asexual. The book was in the adult section, but the parents thought that it shouldn't be in the library at all. Library officials says their library had about 90 books with LGBTQ themes in a 67,000 book collection. The library agreed to move Genderqueer behind the counter so that people would have to ask a librarian for it if they want to read it, but that wasn't enough. The complaints turned into alleged harassment, and the library director resigned. And they obviously use the term grooming because they're awful. Bizarrely, many of the people who voted to cut most of the funding to the library said they don't believe it should close. Ensing even said that she wanted the vote to be a quote-unquote wake-up call to the library to get rid of the few LGBTQ books that it has. They can ask for a millage again, she said. Yeah, it's... No, that's very short-sighted. That library is not going to come back. Michigan Supreme Court rules that anti-LGBTQ discrimination is illegal. So, Michigan Supreme Court has ruled that businesses, landlords, and others cannot discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity, even though the state's civil rights legislation doesn't specifically mention those categories. All quote-unquote comics are for kids anyways. Yeah, they don't care if it's for kids or not. They just don't want to be aware that there's LGBTQ content. Now, yeah, this law is good. It probably won't have much enforcement. So, here in Minnesota, the state where I am forced to reside, a settlement reached in years-long disability rights case. So people with disabilities in Minnesota celebrated a big win after reaching a settlement in a years-long federal court case that accused the state's Department of Human Services of segregating individuals by not allowing them to choose where they lived. The agreement, announced last week, requires the state to prioritize people with disabilities who, for years, have wanted to live in their own homes or apartments. Dion Swanson has lived the last 20 years in a group home in New Hope. The 4-bed house is one of the most common living arrangements for people with disabilities in Minnesota. I've always lived in a group home, Swanson said in an interview on Monday. I've never been in other settings. But the 49-year-old wants to be on her own. That's why she joined the class action lawsuit filed in 2016. And disabled people are human beings who should, live in the world, which is part of the reason why accessibility needs to be improved. Attorneys from Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid argued in the case that the state over-relied on group homes, making it difficult for individuals with disabilities to live on their own. There are people who live in these group homes who don't need 24 hours of care. said supervising attorney Stephen Schmidt, who said their case centered around the lack of options and what attorneys referred to as, quote-unquote, a pervasive over-reliance on segregated facilities that discriminate against people with disabilities. I think a lot of times when people would call our office or call their case manager to move, they just wouldn't know where to start. But the settlement is intended to change that, he said. In 2020, DHS launched a new program, Housing Stabilization Services, to help older adults and disabled people to find and keep housing. Every disabled person should have the opportunity of living where they choose, a DHS spokesperson wrote in a statement. DHS recognizes that finding housing is challenging, and we continue to work to improve access for those we serve. And this could also hopefully lead the way to more accessibility, although this has a decent chance of leading to a different type of segregation. But Mississippi man arrested after attempting to run over young black bicyclists. I'm guessing the stupid N-words was what was said by this person. The Ripley community in Mississippi has banded together to hold a man named Mark Hall accountable for blatantly disregarding the safety of young black children, which he disturbingly bragged about on social media. This past Sunday, Hall used his cell phone to record a video of himself driving a short distance behind a group of black cyclists cruising in the middle of the street. Rather than slowing down, veering to the side, or honking at the children, Hall showed himself speeding down the middle of the street, troublingly saying, "Ah, hell, 50 points," an apparent reference to video games where points are accumulated by running down pedestrians. As the kids swiftly moved out of the way, the 49-year-old man let out a jolly old laugh and referred to the young bicyclists as stupid N-words. Hall, apparently proud of his behavior, notably uploaded the video to Snapchat. After the incident, parents called the local authorities to take action against Hall, who was ultimately arrested on 9 charges of simple assault and 1 count of attempted physical menacing, according to Fox 13 Memphis. It actually seemed... One of the victims said his bike was clipped by Hall's vehicle during the encounter, an allegation that could get one of the simple assault charges bumped up to a felony charge. But they don't know if they can prove that, which I would rather they go with what they can on those sorts of charges. Missouri man with developmental disabilities remains in ER after service provider quit. Javelin Pride Month. Oh. Wait. Javelin missile song with English lyrics on YouTube. Oh. Because the Ukrainian conflict. Gotcha. Um, Fuck Russia. I mean, I, I mean, I kind of obviously I wish the war had never happened, but uh, yeah, that sounds possibly right. I'm terrible at remembering any sort of months, and I might have to check out that song later. I don't want any claims on things. Anyway, so St. Louis, Missouri. More than 2 weeks after his in-home service provider quit, Jason, I can't pronounce Jason's last name, remains in an emergency room, unsure of his future. He says that he's not there to be treated for a laceration or infection. There's nothing broken, his attorney says, other than the system that's supposed to help him. He never should have been there to begin with, so every day that he is adds to the injury. He had to be physically and chemically restrained, also psychologically and therapeutically. He's probably had a setback in terms of his development. He's been living in a home in rural St. Francois County. Through a contract with the Missouri Department of Mental Health. Basically, I had on the around-the-clock services for 9 years. He required 2 caregivers at all times, 3 if he went to the dentist or doctor. Earlier this summer, Sahil gave the required 30-day notice that it intended to cancel its contract to care for him and his sister. The reasons remain unclear. I'm guessing because they don't care. But yeah, it's more and more, it's just a lot of places want to stop helping people, and it's a problem all over the country, arguably all over the world, because if you're too different from the norm, whether it be because you're disabled, because you're LGBTQ, because you look too different, so many things, and people just don't want certain people to exist. So, a string of killings in New Mexico have sent shockwaves through Muslim communities across the U.S. So, authorities identified the 4th victim on Monday to have not ruled out the possibility that the murders of several Muslim men in the city of Albuquerque could be linked, i.e., possible serial killer. Just for being different. If you're not a Christian, cis, white, het person, some people don't like you, and some people can't stand the sight of you. So 3 of the killings happened last week, and authorities have said that the race and religion of the victims were common factors. Investigators believe Friday's murder may be connected to 3 recent murders of Muslim men, also from South Asia, police said. But who cares what Biden thinks? Yeah, basically, Islamophobia is still a thing, and much like the anti-LGBTQ hate, 2-on-1 care is not profitable. Yeah, I'm sure that's their their reasoning. I mean, with society the way it is, of course they're going to pick like the capitalist solution to everything. Many states refuse 2-on-1 care under any circumstances, even if it's needed. I guess they subscribe to a different ethical point of view than me. My ethical point of view is what causes the least harm. So ideally, we'd be in a society that causes the least harm, which involves a lot of people helping out other people. So, this is just police being awful. I think I probably should have skipped that one. Ohio officer suspended after caught using N-word on body cam. Once again, just a suspension. Honestly, these people should be fired. Now, that requires the police, the whole police system, not to be entirely corrupt and needing to be thrown out, which, let's be honest, kinda does need to be completely reworked. An Ohio officer has been disciplined for using racial slur while on duty. 14-year-old veteran was stripped of her policing powers due to hateful tirade on camera. Oh wait, was this the same? Oh, did I forgot Cincinnati was in Ohio. That's my bad. So, Oklahoma, where the racist, sexist like to live, where the school forces parents to sign and notarize their kids' genitals, so kids can play in school sports. Fuck Oklahoma. So last week, Aaron Matson, executive director of abortion rights group Repro Action, shared a photo on Twitter of an affidavit required by Woodall Public Schools. This has nothing to do with encouraging girls to be athletes. This is totalitarianism. This is a white nationalist agenda. This is anti-LGBTQ agenda, the anti-abortion agenda. It's all the same agenda. Yeah, I mean, white nationalism is very oftentimes linked to all of this. Oklahoma public schools now require students to provide a notarized affidavit attesting to their biological sex in order to participate in sports. The policy applies to all public schools from kindergarten through college. The policy comes after Governor Kevin Stitt signed a bill in March banning trans women and girls from participating in women's and girls' school sports teams. The quote-unquote Save Women Sports Act requires parents to sign an affidavit that states that the sex assigned at birth to their child as a prerequisite for participating in school sports, which will totally ruin a lot of women's sports because it'll be forcing trans men to participate in women's sports. Which then gets used to, which under the guise of pretending that those trans men are trans women, it's used to further justify their awful attitude. Oklahoma is one of 18 states to pass bans on trans girls' participation in school sports in a recent wave of anti-trans legislation, but it is the only one so far to require an affidavit for all student athletes. Proponents of such ban argue that trans women and girls possess unfair advantages over cisgender women, and their participation threatens women's and girls' sports, which is not how anything works. In fact, there's a lot of interesting stuff you could do. Quad ball. requires no more than you can't have more than 3 people of the same gender on your quad ball team. So, Benedict College becomes first HBCU to launch esports gaming room and degree track. So, Benedict College, a historically black college and university in Columbia, South Carolina, is the first of its kind to offer gaming and a degree track in esports. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is esports is more and more being considered a sport, and by the general populace, it was always technically a sport, but it was just an electronic sport. So they announced its first bachelor's degree program in esports administration, aiming towards skills related to planning, organizing, and marketing events. But it's nice to further add degrees and diversity, since technically the more educated you are, the more likely you are to understand how awful the system is. So this is beneficial for marginalized groups to not be exploited and put in positions where they feel like they need to fight against other groups. So, like I said, Texas is trying to compete with Florida over which state is more awful. Dallas Taco Bell sued over store manager allegedly throwing scalding water on black customers. Brittany Davis and her niece, a minor identified as CT, are taking legal action against Dallas Taco Bell, where the manager is being accused of brutally assaulting them over an order dispute. According to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the incident occurred on June 17th when Davis and CT realized they had some food missing from their $31 order. After attempting to secure help in the drive-thru, the duo proceeded to try entering the dining area, which was closed at the time, to get their order corrected. An employee eventually let them in, locking the doors behind them, according to the lawsuit obtained by Today. Upon speaking for 10 minutes, the employer ultimately refused to correct Davis and CT's order. One employee proceeded to allegedly challenge CT to a fight before the manager, whom the duo hadn't yet spoken with, threw a bucket of scalding water on them. The newly released video footage shows Brittany and CT having a conversation with employees about their order. At the same time, you can see an employee on the phone in the back of the restaurant filling a container with boiling water, walking over the counter and pouring it on CT and Brittany. The footage also reveals an employee brandishing a firearm after the scalded customers fled the store. 10 seizures from the trauma. Yeah, that's horrible and probably racially motivated, because I guarantee you if I went to Taco Bell in most places, I would not get that. Well, no, I take that back. I do not always pass. On days which I pass, I can get, I could get an order corrected. On days when I can't pass, that's a different story. So, teacher who sexually abused a 13-year-old student gets a 60-day sentence delayed after giving birth. So, Texas teacher Marka Bodine was sentenced to 60 days, a mere 60 days in prison after she admitted to sexually abusing a former student, but her sentence has been delayed because she had recently given birth. Bodine was arrested and charged with the continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14 in April 2021, not long after she told her principal that one of her old students had begun harassing her and making threats of self-harm. The student was a 6th grader in Bodine's class when they first met, and the victim claimed that they played Fortnite together before texting each other. They first engaged in sexual intercourse, and by sexual intercourse, obviously, they mean rape. The student was 13. The student was raped. Bodine moved to the same apartment complex where the victim lived, and later she drove to his home to visit him between July 2018 and March 2021. She admitted in court she sent between 25 to 40 explicit photographs to the boy between April 20th and February 2021. Bodine is not in a Texas prison yet because she recently gave birth. She has until June 5th, 2023 to report to jail. The victim is not the father of her child, although the identity has not been revealed. District Attorney Office sought a 20 to 40-year prison sentence for Bodine due to the nature of her abuse. She is required to register as a sex offender and undergo therapy. But, yeah. Yeah. Texas man gets 25-year prison sentence for hate crime attack on Asian family. So, a Texas man has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for brutally attacking an Asian family. He is blamed for the COVID pandemic because that anti-Asian rhetoric or propaganda spread throughout the United States. So, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, 21-year-old Jose Gomez III confronted the Burmese family at Sam's Club on March 14th, 2020, just a day after then-President Donald Trump declared the coronavirus outbreak as a national emergency. Prosecutors say the Midland resident followed the victims for several minutes because he perceived them to be a threat, as they came from the quote-unquote country that started spreading the disease around. Gomez found a serrated knife that was being sold in the store and proceeded to bend the blade so the edge was facing outward as he held it with a fist. And the investigators say he then cut the father by punching him in the face and then retrieved another knife before turning his direction to the father's children, who were 6 and 2 years old at the time. Gomez allegedly slashed the oldest kid's face, causing a cut that began millimeters from the right eye and wrapped around the back of his head. Gomez also stabbed the Sam's Club's employee who intervened. According to the DOJ, Gomez was eventually restrained and held on the ground while shouting to the family, "Get out of America." Gomez admitted he had tried to kill the 6-year-old boy before the worker stepped in. Yeah. I hate this country. And I also hate that I keep panicking before trying to organize with my apartment. Start the first steps for that. Human Rights Campaign sues Tennessee over anti-trans restroom law. So, A trans girl and her parents have sued to challenge a Tennessee law that bars students and staffers in public schools from using multi-occupancy restrooms and changing rooms that match their gender identity. DH began transitioning socially 2 years ago in January. However, administrators at her school said she could not use the girls' restroom because of the Tennessee law. She had been attending school online previously, but was permitted to use girls' restrooms when she attended any in-person event. But once she returned for in-person classes, that was not an option for her. The school has 4 singles occupancy restrooms that she has been allowed to use, but this amounts to differential treatment, the complaint says. It's essentially separate but equal treatment. This differential treatment violates the U.S. Constitution's guarantee of equal provisions of the laws, as well as Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, the federal law that bans sex discrimination in schools that receive federal funds. The suit contends it seeks to have the restroom law struck down, nominal damages to cover the family's costs, and other relief the court deems appropriate. Another Tennessee bathroom law was struck down by a federal court in May. Oh, that was the one with requiring businesses to post warning signs if they allowed trans people to use public restrooms of their choice. Yeah. So, late Friday in the quiet suburb of Sandy, Utah, 2 teens just graduated from high school were attacked by another young man after the couple was spotted hugging. I know this is the most damning of acts. 2 people hugging for kindness and solidarity. Now, these people happen to be a couple, and this information was probably also throughout the school to some degree. But anyways, Christian Peacock and his boyfriend Jacob Metcalf were standing at the end of Peacock's driveway, and the 2 were saying long goodbye for the night. A dark sedan with 5 occupants rolled past slowly and revved the engine, as one of the group allegedly hissed out the window, "F you, F slur." The car continued slowly down the street and disappeared. After the pair stood there in disbelief, they told the Salt Lake Tribune, and Peacock asked Metcalf to stick around. 45 minutes later, as the couple continued their goodbyes, the sedan returned and then came to a stop. 2 teenage boys got out of the vehicle. "We don't like seeing gay people in our street," one said, according to Peacock and Metcalf. The boy took his shirt off and began flexing. "Do we turn you on?" he asked. Why are homophobes and transphobes so weird? 3 others in the car laughed at their friend's taunts while one filmed the incident. A shirtless man then walked up to Metcalf, pushing him on the shoulder. Peacock says he jumped in front of his boyfriend and told the teen to lay off. "Just get out of here," Peacock recalls shouting. "You're repressed, that's why you're acting this way. You're probably also gay and acting out because of it." Now, that's technically a stereotype, which isn't always helpful. Though, honestly, if I was a teenager and I heard someone asking if I turned them on, or asking if they were, if I was sexually into them, that would just be, yeah. That's when the young man turned on Peacock and allegedly threw a hard punch to the left side of his head. Peacock's sister, Jocelyn, 19, ran out of the house when she heard the confrontation. She found her brother sitting on the sidewalk where Metcalf had set him down in a state of shock. He'd suffered a concussion and his brain was swelling. Metcalf and Jocelyn Peacock both pulled out their phones to identify the perpetrators. As he had Metcalf's footage, he yelled at the group, "Get out of here, get the F out of here. What the F is wrong with you people? you are effing disgusting. And that's ultimately a lot of homophobia and a lot of transphobia is essentially people being disgusted by our existence, about the existence of people too different from them. Yeah. People are awful. Anyway, trans equality wins in federal court as state Medicaid ordered to pay for gender-affirming care. West Virginia's Medicaid program has denied gender-affirming care for trans people since 2013. On Tuesday, a judge put an end to the discriminatory practice. A U.S. District Court Judge Robert C. Chambers ruled this week that West Virginia's Medicaid program can no longer exclude gender-affirming medical care for its trans members. The ruling will apply to the approximately 579,000 West Virginians enrolled in Medicaid. Since 2013, the state's Medicaid program has denied coverage for surgical or pharmaceutical treatments associated with gender dysphoria or any physical, psychiatric, or psychological examinations, testings, treatments, or services provided or performed in preparation for or as the result of sex transformation surgery. This is a new way of saying it. I can't wait for my sex to be transformed into something more powerful. I just assume that's more powerful. Anyways, in November 2020, a class action lawsuit on behalf of two trans men, Christopher Fain and Zachary Martel, was filed by the LGBTQ advocacy organization Lambda Legal. Attorneys Nichols Coster and the Employment Law Center. Martel is in a same-sex marriage. This great's discriminatory exclusions on gender-affirming care had caused the men to be denied coverage for hormone replacement therapy and mastectomies. The men had to pay for hormones out of their own pockets. Furthermore, the lack of access to surgery and supportive therapy worsened their gender dysphoria. The men's attorneys successfully argued that the exclusions violated the 1965 Federal Medicaid Act, which states that the medical assistance made available to any individual shall not be less in amount, duration, or scope than the medical assistance made available to any other such individual. West Virginia's exclusions were unlawful under federal constitution and statutory guarantees of freedom from discrimination based on sex and gender, the men's lawyers argued. And the judge agreed. DC Court freezes LGBTQ nonprofit Casa Ruby's bank accounts. So, Casa Ruby's bank accounts were frozen Wednesday by a temporary restraining order issued by a judge in support of the Attorney General of DC. Recently, the LGBTQ+ organization has been accused of mismanaging public funds. So, DC Attorney General had sought temporary restraining order against Casa Ruby to prevent its founder, Ruby Corrado, from withdrawing or transferring funds in all accounts under the nonprofit's name. Corrado is the only person authorized to access Casa Ruby's bank or PayPal accounts, despite resigning as executive director last fall, according to the court documents. Casa Ruby's operations suggest patterns of gross mismanagement and poor oversight of the program finances. Instead of fulfilling its important mission of providing transitional housing and support to LGBTQ+ youth, Casa Ruby diverted hundreds of thousands of dollars in district grants and charitable donations from their intended purpose. He also said Corrado appears to have fled the country, withdrawn at least tens of thousands of dollars from this nonprofit, and failed to and failed to pay employees and vendors. Wow. That's upsetting and important to understand. The nonprofit that you're funding. Four the officers involved in Breonna Taylor's death charged and arrested, finally. So, 4 officers involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor have been charged and arrested. Former detectives Brett Hankison and Joshua Janes, as well as Detective Kelly Hannah Goodlett and Sergeant Kyle Meany, learned of their fates on Thursday. Vice reports. Speaking at a press conference on Thursday, Attorney General Merrick Garland said the charges include 2 counts of deprivation of civil rights against Hankison. Non-profit organizations are complicated, yes. Include 2 counts of deprivation of civil rights against Hankison, who allegedly fired 10 shots through a window and glass door along the sides of Taylor's Louisville apartment. The Justice Department also confirmed that Janes, Goodlett, and Meany are being charged for conspiracy for violating Taylor's Fourth Amendment rights. The officers, according to the department, drafted and submitted a false affidavit used to secure a search warrant for Taylor's residence. In addition to being accused of falsifying information, the officers face charges for an attempted cover-up afterwards. Janes was fired after former police chief Yvette Gentry said he lied on application for the warrant, but yeah. And while this is small, at least something is being done. So, Brittany Griner, sentenced to 9 years in prison, fined for smuggling drugs. After being found guilty of smuggling drugs with criminal intent in Russia, which she had to use, she had, like, special licenses for medical marijuana, but I'm sure the fact that she's non-white and not straight worked against her. Brittany Griner was sentenced to 9 years in prison and was fined 1 million rubles, which is about $16,590. Now, given how little WNBA members are paid, so much so that they feel that it's a good idea, or they need to play elsewhere in other countries, yeah. So, basketball star appeared in court on Thursday, becoming emotional while pleading with the judge for leniency. The 9-year sentence was close to the maximum sentencing and the requested time by prosecutors, who asked for 9.5 years in their closing arguments, CNN reports. The verdict and sentencing will add pressure on the Biden administration, which previously offered a prisoner exchange deal. According to the Post, Griner's freedom now depends on Russian President Vladimir Putin, who will make the final decision on the administration's offer. I mean, technically, Biden is also a factor in her release, but more importantly, in Blavity news, see, I'm wearing my Steph Curry shirt for a reason. Steph Curry spoke to Blavity News. So on August 4th, WNBA star Brittany Griner learned her fate after spending nearly 6 months in a Russian prison following accusations that she had smuggled drugs into the country. The 31-year-old was found guilty of smuggling drugs with criminal intent and sentenced to 9 years in prison, as well as fined 1 million rubles. Now that Griner's verdict has officially been handed down, more athletes are speaking up. Blavdi got the opportunity to speak with Steph Curry, who took a break from his annual Curry camp in San Francisco to share a few words of encouragement following the sentencing. Is beyond the sports world at this point, but myself and all of Reiner's colleagues have spoken very loudly that we need to keep her name in the media to make sure she feels loved and supported, Curry told Blavdi in an exclusive sit-down. Unfortunately, it's such a helpless situation when you think about the detail of what's happened. Today is not a great day, obviously, but I think there are other conversations that are going on, and hopefully we still have a safe and speedy return for her. The right people are feeling the pressure, and I'm hoping that works out for BG, he continued. It's an important factor for speaking out, but obviously the WNBA, not members of the WNBA not getting paid enough is the reason that Brittany Griner was put in or forced to choose between having a living wage and taking playing basketball in a different country just to get the rest of the money that she needed. So, on to Trump. Trumpity Trump. Trump allegedly asked Chief of Staff why generals couldn't be like Hitler's totally loyal ones in World War II. So, I realize this has been talked about a lot. It's just, dear God, this has been the most mask-off Nazi moment for Trump. Technically. I mean, there's been a million other practically mask-off Nazi moments, but I know I'm gonna get super political here. Nazis are bad. And I don't care if people punch Nazis in the face. So, pulling from the upcoming The Divider, Trump in the White House by Peter Baker and Susan Glasser, The New Yorker shared excerpt including mention of an alleged instance in which Trump criticized quote-unquote fucking generals in remarks to John Kelly, who served as the former president's chief of staff from 2017 to 2019. You fucking generals, why can't you be like the German generals? Trump is alleged to have asked Kelly, to which he responded by asking him to clarify which generals he was intending to evoke. When Trump noted he was indeed referring to the German generals in World War II, per the New Yorker, Kelly is said to have attempted to explain that these generals were nearly successful in killing Nazi party leader Adolf Hitler. Trump, however, allegedly wasn't having it. No, they were... Wait. I feel like I almost have to do a Trump voice here. No, they were... I can't do a Trump voice. They were totally loyal to him, he's claimed to have said, with him in question being Hitler. The full book is billed to give readers a breakdown of the 4 years when Donald Trump went to war with Washington, complete with insight from former cabinet officers and advisors, among others. It's due on September 20th. But yeah, it's... Everything is awful. No, this isn't awful. So 7 films and shows with messy, amazing, ridiculous, and real LGBTQ plus disabled characters. So I'm gonna need a breakdown. So the media has been pretty trash about documenting queer stories with disabled people in them. In fact, the 2021 GLAAD Studio Responsibility Index reported 0 disabled LGBTQ plus characters across all major film releases for the entire year. That's not great. That's putting it mildly. Yet, while disabled queer folks don't pop up all that often on our screens, we certainly exist. According to the Movement Advancement Project, there are estimated 3 to 5 million LGBTQ plus adults with disabilities in the United States alone. But the queer community often forgets that we are a large part of the crew and ignorant to the fact that we all end up joining it if we're lucky enough to grow old. I mean, that's part of the social model of disability. And, yeah. So, Margarita with a Straw. A critical hit in the 2014 film circuit, Margarita with a Straw is an amazing coming-of-age story of Layla Kapoor, a disabled songwriter with cerebral palsy who discovers after a series of heartbreaks that she needs more out of life. Tired of being seen as lesser and unlovable, she relocates to America and starts a complicated romantic entanglement with both a cute blonde caretaker and a blind young woman, trying to figure out where they fit into her life, if at all. The director shared that's based off of her, the life of her cousin, who simply wanted to have sex for her 40th birthday and was shamed into silence by her traditionally repressive Indian family. I never know when it's family members. Family members always like raise the potential suspicion, but I've never seen the thing before. I don't know much about Pose either. I hate Margarita with a Straw. Okay. I assumed you would know. Yeah, it's always suspicious when it's like a relative. How do you feel about Pose, out of curiosity? Uh, I'm sorry, his character has much hair. Who also has HIV? Yeah, this is just H. This is relates to just HIV. Pose is mid okay. Queer as Folk, Peacock, your grandmother's Queer as Folk, Peacock returns. This, why does it say 1975? Peacock's turn at the helm for the third adaptation of this series proves that you can, in fact, teach old dogs tricks. Based in New Orleans after a shooting of Babylon nightclub, the show. Plus, it has what I can honestly first real disabled sex scene with actual disabled people that I've ever seen. Yeah. What's your opinion on the new queer? This is not your grandmother. It sounds like a newer one. I don't know why they listed 1975. If it's a newer one. Dead End Paranormal Park. Jesse Gender recently did an interview. I might have to with the creator of Paranormal Park. I'd vaguely hear it, but the show's necessary recognition of Norma, Barney's autistic know-it-all friend and partner in crime. Ooh, haven't seen that Queer as Folk reboot? Okay. I don't like autistic and know-it-all together. Um, that almost feels a bit stereotypical, but FC Harley Quinn 2019. Uh, so obviously that's her with her girlfriend Voice Ivy. Oh, encouraging her to be different and unique. That's mental health related stuff. I never know with stuff like that because I mean new L word that might be in here. Euphoria is I've heard talked about a bunch. Dragon Prince. I don't know about Euphoria or Dragon Prince either. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's oftentimes a lot of stuff with disability, especially mental health, is very questionable in terms of quality. Like, there's usually a lot of problems with almost any media, to be fair. So, senators introduced bill to help disabled people have access to reproductive health care. And Senator Tammy Duckworth said the law is necessary to restore bodily autonomy to disabled people. Now, the bill called the Reproductive Healthcare Accessibility Act would provide funding for training and education programs focused on reproductive health care specifically for disabled people. It add more disabled doctors and nurses to the workforce, and calls for a study analyzing reproductive health for disabled communities. I want to restore bodily autonomy to the community of disabled people. Disabled senator fighting for disabled rights. So we are constantly have our bodily autonomy questioned. There's this horrendous history of forced sterilizations, refusal to allow access to fertility treatments or birth control or abortions. So we absolutely had to be clear to enshrine the rights of she uses persons with disabilities to have their bodily autonomy and, in this case, to deal with their reproductive rights. As of 2019, at least 13% of the U.S. population lived with a disability, according to census data. About 1 in 10 people, about 1 in 10 disabled people are able to become pregnant. I doubt that it's that low. I doubt that's that low. I seriously doubt it's that low. Duckworth and Murray are hoping new legislation will address some of the overwhelming issues that disabled people must contend with. This group of the population is less likely to have healthcare providers and routine checkups, and more likely to have unmet healthcare needs because of the cost, according to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Also, there is a good chance of people having the attitude of they'd rather die than be disabled. So, yeah, every single American deserves to have control over their own body, life, and future. And that, of course, includes Americans with disabilities, Maria Washington said in a statement. But, yeah, the unacceptable discrimination and while I hope this bill gets passed, I am always skeptical. I'm usually skeptical anything involving disability gets done. So, there's a lot of disability stuff. This episode, how healthcare disability benefits for veterans became a fight in Congress. So, bill, this is something that Jon Stewart has worked on for years after he left The Daily Show. A bill that would enhance healthcare and disability benefits for millions of veterans exposed to toxic burn pits hit a snag in the Senate last week, angering advocates like Jon Stewart, who say help from the government is long overdue. But unfortunately, the government treats soldiers like toys that they can throw away. Lawmakers have been hearing endlessly from constituents with respiratory illnesses and cancers they attribute to serving near burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. The military used the pits to dispose of such things as chemicals, cans, tires, plastics, and medical and human waste. Veteran groups say service members who were exposed to the pits have waited long enough for enhanced health benefits, and lawmakers largely agree. The Senate is ultimately expected to send the measure to President Joe Biden's desk. It's just a question of when and where the issues stand. Yeah, so first, veterans who served near burn pits will get 10 years of health care coverage through the Department of Veteran Affairs upon their separation from the military rather than 5. Second, legislation directs the VA to presume that certain respiratory illnesses and cancers were relative to burn pit exposure. This takes the burden of proof off the veteran, allowing them to obtain disability payments to compensate for their injury without having to show the illness was a result of their service. Roughly 70% of disability claims related to burn pit exposure are denied by the VA due to lack of evidence, scientific data, and information from the Defense Department. But yeah, so when the CBO scored the bill, it projected that nearly $400 billion slated to be spent on health services would move from discretionary spending to mandatory spending, which is mostly sheltered from the bruising battles that occur every year when they spend money in appropriations bills. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan fiscal watchdog and capitalist hound, said a reclassification of nearly $400 billion from discretionary to mandatory would, quote-unquote, both reduce the pressure to keep those costs under control and make it easier for appropriators to spend more elsewhere in the budget without offsets. Those dynamics also applied to the bill when the Senate approved it in June. Nevertheless, the senators voted for the measure overwhelmingly. Yeah, And now some Republicans don't like it. Because I hate this country. So, U.S. court sentences Ahmaud Arbery killers to life in prison. U.S. judge sentenced father and son Gregory and Travis McMichael to life in prison for federal hate crime 2020 murder of Ahmaud Arbery, a black man fatally shot after jogging in a suburban Georgia neighborhood. U.S. District Judge Lisa Godby Wood also sentenced the two men's neighbors and co-defendant William Roddy Bryan to 35 years in the coastal Georgia city of Brunswick on Monday. All three were found guilty of violating Arbery's civil rights because of his race earlier this year. Obviously, it's fueled mass protests against racism and vigilantism. Vigilantism? Whatever. At the first hearing, Marcus Arbery, the slain man's father, asked the judge to sentence the younger McMichael to serve the maximum in state prison on the federal charges. Yeah, it's at least they're getting charged. It's easier when they're not cops. Obviously, or at the very least obvious to me, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham thinks states should decide on same-sex marriage. Much like the abortion thing, Republicans want to... the Supreme Court has already said they're going to go after same-sex marriage. So, unsurprisingly, Republicans vote. A lot of Republicans voted against it. Interesting that some people came in support of it, which is a maybe good sign. I don't know. I don't know if some of the end result of authoritarian views have broken some Republicans. Because Trump was really bad. Now, that being said, it's not like Democrats or Republicans are ever going to vote for change. So, yeah. Words. So, trans cyclist stripped of silver medal in middle of competition. So, Leah Jenas won a silver medal. A day later, she was told she didn't meet the sport's new requirements for trans women. Leah Jenas, a trans cyclist competing in USA cycling events since June, was unceremoniously stripped of a silver medal last week for not meeting the latest requirements for trans athlete participation in the sport. Jenas was competing in the women's elite individual pursuit at the USA Cycling Elite Track National Championship in Pennsylvania, where she won a silver medal, placing second behind cisgender cyclist Bethany Matzik. The next day, Jenas was preparing for the mass start races. She was approached by a USA cycling official who informed her that she could no longer compete and that her silver medal would be revoked. Jenas' expulsion comes despite the fact that she was eligible 6 weeks ago for 2 elite competitions under rules established by the Global Cycling Governing Board, Union Cycliste Internationale. Those races were held at the same facility and overseen by the same technical director as last week's competition. Yet 6 weeks later, Jenas wrote an Instagram post, "Now that I'm doing well at nationals, I'm suddenly ineligible to compete." Um, in June, the UECI revised rules around trans female athlete participation, lowering the allowable testosterone threshold from 5 nanomoles per liter for 12 months to 2.5 nanomoles per liter for 2 years. Uh, so 2.5. Wait. How low is that? It's been way too long since I've looked up. Looking it up in a different chart or a different page. Da, da, da. So, okay, that makes more sense. Oh, so 72. So, average woman testosterone. Okay, so they lowered it super low. Now, this is not the average of every woman. Obviously, testosterone can be higher in women. Um, so I don't know. So Indonesia revised rules. Yeah, so um, most trans people, it's 10 nanograms per deciliter, which is about uh, less than 1 nanomole, less than half a nanomole per liter. But the thing is, there are plenty of cis women who have testosterone above that. Now, uh, I don't know if it's because she hasn't been on HRT long enough, or there hasn't been documentation long enough. I don't know. This is just total bullshit. Speaking of bullshit, gays against groomers. Jamie Michelle compares trans healthcare to Nazi human experiments. So, an anti-LGBTQ activist, Jamie Michelle, who goes by Gays Against Groomers on social media, compared gender-affirming healthcare to Nazi experiments performed by Joseph Mengele. Yeah, no. Um, no. All of this awful. Michelle also complained that conservatives are less accepted than gay people because people say mean things to her on Instagram. Yeah, yeah, I get death threats. And I'm like practically unknown. Anyways, Canada celebrates Emancipation Day, highlighting history of slavery in the country. So, Canada is celebrating Emancipation Day, anniversary of the August 1st, 1833 Slavery Abolition Act. Um, yeah, slavery was practiced in colonial Canada for 200 years before it was abolished. French colonists primarily enslaved indigenous Canadians, while the English imported enslaved black people from Africa and continued to enslave their descendants. Uh, Thousands of Canadians suffered enslavement before the institution was abolished. Even when the Slavery Abolition Act was passed, only children under 6 were immediately liberated. Others had to work for several years before gaining their freedom. Canada first recognized Emancipation Day last year. Because of course, they didn't recognize it before. Scholars call for a formal apology for slavery as a next step. And reparations. Playground design that gets everyone in the fun. Now, this is Bloom, so to yeah, so you can't just plunk a playground down and say it's accessible, says a scientist and urban planner at the Bloorview Research Institute's Epic Lab. When you make it hard to get to the playground because there's no easy parking or the pathway is not accessible or a family has to cut a visit short because there's no accessible washroom, you give the message that kids and adults who are disabled do not belong there. So, Tim is the lead author of Creating Inclusive Playgrounds, a comprehensive playbook for planning and designing a playground that fully includes disabled children and adults. It's based on an international scan of 125 reports on accessible playground design, inclusive play studies, and collaboration with the Universities of Toronto and Alberta, and an American inclusive designer. We know that play has remarkable social, emotional, and physical health benefits for kids, Tim says. But yeah. Children who don't speak benefit from on-site communication boards with symbols they can point to make choices like taking a break, going on a swing, or using a slide. So, good, assuming they can get it done and do it and make the whole thing as accessible as possible and not just have the accessible part section of the playground. Because separate but equal stuff is problematic, and even in this picture, it's there's an element of tradition over accessibility. Slides are not accessible, but they're tradition. So people like to keep them. Or, sorry, slides are not universally accessible, I should say. Christian school officials accused of trying to exorcise a gay student. This was a hate crime. For students who attended a Christian school in Saskatchewan, Canada, have alleged widespread abuse, including at least one violent anti-gay quote-unquote exorcism. After a 12-month investigation, Canadian police turned their findings over to Crown prosecutors in April to consider possible charges. The 18 students, many of whom attended the Christian Center Academy in Saskatoon, between 1995 and 2010, filed criminal abuse complaints alleging frequent paddlings, coercion, traumatizing rituals, and solitary confinement. According to CBC News, corporal punishment was outlawed by the Supreme Court of Canada in 2004. One former student, Coy Nolan, describes a particularly disturbing quote-unquote exorcism meant to cast out quote-unquote gay demons. Nolan claims he was suspended from the Christian Center Academy in May 2004 after the school's director was informed that he was gay. According to Nolan, the director had interrogated the then 16-year-old for several hours, calling him evil and an abomination. And the abomination thing really speaks to the disgust that's felt by these people. So, days later, four schools and Saskatoon's Christian Center Church officials visited the Nolan home and performed an abusive ritual with Nolan's mother, Carolyn, present. They put their hands on the student, yelling, grunting, and speaking in tongues. Nolan says the school's director also beat him with a large wooden paddle, leaving him bruised and limping. This was abuse, Nolan says. This was a hate crime. In the statement, officials from the school, which have since been renamed Legacy Christian Academy, claimed the homophobia Nolan and others allege does not exist at the school today. Nolan and other former students claim that many of the same administrators who were present when they attended Christian Center Academy continue to work at Legacy Christian Academy today. So, charges are brought up for that. Man who beheaded Azerbaijani LGBTQ plus journalist sentenced to nearly a decade in jail. So, Avaz Hafizli, who worked as a journalist for the news channel Canal 13, was killed in his Baku home on 22nd of February. The openly gay man was found wrapped inside a rug and hauled to a morgue in the capital city in a quote-unquote garbage truck, activists said. But the Baku Court of Grave Crimes has sentenced Hafizli's own cousin, Amrullah Gulaliev, to 9 years and 6 months in prison for brutally murdering the 24-year-old. OC Media, which covers the caucus, reported Saturday. I told them to turn back from this path of being gay, is essentially the implication. And he said, "It's my life, go and do your job." Gulaliev told the court, "I took a knife from the kitchen and attacked him." In Azerbaijan, murder carries potential jail sentence of 10 years. Yet, if the murder is executed with significant cruelty, the sentence is doubled, according to the Criminal Code of Azerbaijan. Obviously, people want tougher sentences, but given that it's a hate crime, but yeah. Through his activism, Hafizli did what he could to ensure all people are treated with kindness and respect. In 2020, he arranged the funeral of a trans sex worker whose family refused to collect her body from the morgue after she was stabbed nearly a dozen times. The whole queer community is in panic now because this violence keeps being justified in the media and even praised by some politicians, said a friend of Hafizli. How Gulaliyev severed Hafizli's genitals showed just severed Hafizli's genitals off showed just how much he viewed LGBTQ plus people with contempt. Another friend of Hafizli added. It's safe to say that this act was directed at Avaz's identity as a gay person. He said, if that is not a statement of you are not a man, then for what purpose would they cut off junk? So, yeah. I hope someone else was able to take up the torch in Azerbaijan. A gay couple was chased out of a park for kissing. The community rallied with a kissathon. So, shocking video shows a couple run out of a park in Colombia's capital city by an angry neighborhood mob. One woman wielding a broom handle. On Sunday in Bogota, Colombia, hundreds of supporters rallied for a gay couple threatened by a mob for kissing in public. By kissing in public. The Colombian Besaton, or Kissathon, was organized on social media in response to a shocking viral video showing the couple Santiago Maldonado and Jorge Esteban Farias being run out of a park in Colombia's capital city by an angry neighborhood mob, one frenzied woman wielding a broom handle. If you don't leave, we'll lynch you, one woman screams in the video. In this neighborhood, we don't allow sex in the park, yells another, especially not in front of children. Kissing is not sex, the last I checked. Over the shouting, the young men ask, what's sex? And repeat they'd only been kissing. Bogota's mayor condemned the incident, according to BBC. But Sunday's demonstration isn't the first Besaton to overtake the Colombian capital. In 2019, crowds of same-sex couples staged an event outside an upscale shopping mall where a man repeatedly pushed a gay couple and screamed profanities when the two were spotted hugging and holding hands. When the couple reported the incident to authorities, they were fined for indecent exposure. You know, hugging and holding hands, the most indecent of indecent exposure. For Sunday's Besaton, which took place at the same park the couple was mobbed in, organizers used the viral video to promote the event, posting action information over the eye-popping sound and images. Turnout was huge. Supporters kissed, danced, and played music while rainbow flags filled the park. Signs read, "Kisses are signs of affection, not a crime," and "We want to be able to kiss without being monitored." One video shows how the frenzied woman wielding a broom handle became a witchy rallying cry as protesters chant, "Bring out your broomsticks, we're not afraid." Colombia is one of the most liberal countries in Latin America when it comes to LGBTQ rights. Same-sex marriage was legalized in 2016, and same-sex parents have equal rights to adoption. Anti-LGBTQ discrimination is prohibited by law. And, yeah, I didn't realize the other thing talked about the Kiss-a-thon response. So, Czech Roma reclaim Holocaust site, but equality feels distant. After a years-long campaign by Roma activists, a pig farm that stood on a former concentration camp is being removed. Putting an end to decades of controversy, a ceremony on June 22nd kicked off the demolition of a pig farm that has for decades stood on the site of a World War II-era concentration camp for Roma in the Czech Republic. But an end to the discrimination against the country's largest minority remains distant. Official records say 327 Roma people died at Lety, which sits 70 kilometers south of Prague. It is estimated that 90% of the Czech Roma population was killed during the Holocaust. Descendants of the victims insist, however, that thousands perished at the camp, which was run by Czechs under the auspices of the Nazis. The removal of the farm, built by communist authorities in the 1970s, and the planned construction of a memorial will crown a long campaign thanks to opposition from hard-right political forces had become emblematic since the 1990s. But despite the victory at Lety, struggles for equality for the nation's 250,000 or so Roma is making little progress. After decades during which Roma children were crawled into special needs institutions, legislation to improve Roma access to the education system was introduced in 2014. Meanwhile, in a landmark move last year, the government agreed to pay compensation to hundreds of women who were involuntarily sterilized. But some Roma still suffer chronic social and economic exclusion. The progress at Lety was symbolic, said Jana Horvathova, the director of the Museum of Romani Culture in can't pronounce that, which has managed the site since the state bought it in 2018. But exclusion is the more fundamental issue. It results in poverty and problems in health, education, employment, and housing. Resistance to the education reforms persist among teachers and parents. And in the face of this deep discrimination, more than 70% of Roma still leave school early. But they're not leaving for jobs. Unemployment is rife among the minority, in some localities higher than 90%, despite the Czech Republic having the lowest unemployment in the European Union at just 3%. On top of the poverty this produces, prejudices and exploitation in the housing market have created vast and virtually lawless ghettos. Yeah. The EU and UN have, over the years, called on Prague to curb discrimination, but international pressure has had little effect. Lety is a victory for the families that perished in that camp, said Miroslav Gross of the Konex NGO, which has helped lead the campaign to unseat the pig farm. But there's been no improvement in terms of integration. Racism is still firmly entrenched in Czech society. The depths of Czech antipathy towards Roma hit international headlines earlier this year as refugees from Ukraine arrived. Czech society rushed to show solidarity with those fleeing the Russian onslaught, welcoming them in the hundreds of thousands. But Roma refugees found themselves stuck at Prague's main train station as authorities around the country accused them of benefit tourism and balked at offering shelter. President Milo Zeman has often referred to the Roma, who make up less than 2% of his country's population, as quote-unquote unadaptables, a euphemism branding them as work-shy and antisocial. Yeah. It's an issue. So, homophobic doctors are pushing conversion therapy at training workshop in Ghana. Not Gaza, sorry. My bad. Ghana. Doctors in Ghana promote conversion therapy and dubbed homosexuality an abnormality and a mental disorder at a training workshop. Open Democracy found high-ranking doctors spread dangerous misinformation about LGBTQ plus people in Ghana at a 2-day training workshop held in city Accra. The workshop purportedly on providing quote-unquote treatment, care, and support for LGBTQ plus people was aimed at nurses, psychologists, counselors, and midwives. It was organized by the National Coalition for Proper Human Sexual Rights and Family Values, known as the Coalition, which proposed the draconian anti-LGBTQ plus family values bill, currently working its way through Ghana's parliament. If the bill passes, it would become a crime to advocate for LGBT plus rights. If an attendee told Open Democracy it felt as though the true goal of the workshop was to recruit members to join the coalition's anti-LGBTQ plus cause. Hess's presentation slide said graphic images of anal prolapse and cited the LGBTQ plus lifestyle as the cause. Hess even claimed bestiality was a symptom of homosexuality. Yeah. So LGBTQ plus or LGBTQ advocates sue Ghana's government after Human Rights Workshop raid. So 2 lawsuits filed on behalf of attendees of a 2021 LGBTQ human rights training workshop in Ghana offers some hope for the future of LGBTQ rights in the country. On May 2021, 21 people were arrested after Ghanaian police raided the workshop focused on documenting and reporting human rights violations against LGBTQ people. The group has since been known in Ghana as the HO21. So 2 separate lawsuits were filed in the Ghana High Court against the Inspector General of Police and the Attorney General of Ghana on behalf of 4 members of the HO21. These individuals were subjected to harassment, assault, discriminatory treatment, etc. One of the lawsuits filed on behalf of 3 members of the HO21 argues that the state violated the right to freedom of assembly as well as protections against discrimination, unlawful arrest, and detention. The second was filed on behalf of an intersex attendee of the 2021 meeting who said she was stripped naked and endured a forced genital inspection by the police. She claims police encouraged other inmates to sexually assault her to quote-unquote prove she was female. Just Hungary has been going pretty bad. So, longtime Orban ally, longtime advisor to Viktor Orban, has resigned over a speech that the Hungarian Prime Minister gave, in which he criticized what he labeled as "quote-unquote" race mixing, sparking international outcry. I don't know how you didn't notice that you're turning your previous anti-migrant rhetoric and anti-Europeanism into pure Nazi text worthy of Goebbels, she said, but I cannot, because of the severity of the fact, even with our friendship of nearly 20 years, overlook that this time. Owen denies the allegations, blaming the media for misrepresenting his comments. Miller, responding to Hagedorn's resignation, he said his government takes a quote-unquote zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism and racism. You can't seriously accuse me of racism after 20 years of working together, Owen said. Yeah, you can. So, assisted suicide is not about autonomy. It is a system of systems which deny autonomy to sick and disabled people. On June 16th, 2022, a 44-year-old Italian citizen named Federico Carboni became the first patient in the history of his country to die by medically assisted suicide. 12 years ago, Carboni was working as a trucker when he found himself seriously injured in a traffic accident that put him in a coma. When he awakened from the coma, he was a quadriplegic. What I find most haunting about Carboni's death are some of his last words, statements that he made explaining his decision to seek medically assisted suicide. Said Carboni, "I do not deny that I am sorry to take leave of life. I would be false and a liar if I said the opposite, because life is fantastic and we only have one. But unfortunately, it went like this. I have done everything possible to be able to live as well as possible and try to recover the maximum from my disability. But by now, I'm both mentally and physically exhausted. I do not have a minimum of autonomy in daily life. I am at the mercy of events. I depend on others for everything. I'm like a boat adrift in the ocean. I am aware of my physical condition and future prospects, so I am totally calm about what I will do." That is the problem with assisted suicide. Most people are in a situation like Carboni's here and have the same opinion because society failed them and they don't see it changing. What I find haunting about this is that ultimately this is an indictment of a terrible personal care services system, a system that fails to pay workers enough to create a reliable workforce, and a system that fails to grant disabled people sufficient authority to control their services. And yeah, this brings into things, but just that speech, the last words of Carboni here are just speak to the issues and the ways in which ultimately assisted suicide often ties with eugenics. And we should fight not just for the living, not just for the young, not just for the old, but we should fight for the fallen as well. And even though Carboni died, we should fight for a life he couldn't have. How the Beirut blast and financial crisis has affected Lebanon's LGBTQ+ community. A devastating explosion at Beirut's port 2 years ago, on top of Lebanon's deteriorating financial situation, has caused the number of people from the LGBTQ plus community seeking help to skyrocket. In 2019, Halem, Lebanon's first LGBTQ plus rights organization, started recording the number of people in need of financial support. Members of the organization were worried that state crackdowns such as curfews following mass anti-government demonstrations would harm the community. They found around 200 people needed aid. Most of them were members of the trans community. By 2022, that list ballooned to more than 2,000 people seeking help with cases of abuse or financial assistance. Yeah, it's increase in abuses, and concerning situations in Lebanon. Myanmar charges Japanese journalist with dissent against army. Toru Kabuta, 26, has been charged with breaching immigration law, a ruling by the military administration, said. A Japanese journalist detained in Myanmar has been charged with breaching immigration law and encouraging dissent against the army, the ruling military administration said. Myanmar's military has clamped down on press freedoms since its coup last year, arresting reporters and photographers as well as revoking broadcasting licenses as the country plunged into chaos. Toru Kabuta, who was held while covering a protest in Yangon last week, has been charged under Section 505A under Immigration Law 13.1. The military administration said in a statement on Thursday, Law 505A, which criminalizes encouraging dissent against the military and carries the maximum 3-year jail term, has been widely used to crack down on dissent. Breaching Immigration Law 13.1 carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. Filmmaker Kabuta, 26, was arrested near an anti-government rally in Yangon along with 2 Myanmar citizens. So he's the fifth foreign journalist to be arrested in Myanmar, after U.S. citizens Nathan Mong and Danny Fenster, Robert Bosiaga of Poland, and Yuki Kitazumi of Japan, all of whom were later freed and deported. Yeah. The situation in Burma has gone from bad to worse. Yeah. This has been talked about more in other places, but many Palestinians were killed just hours before a truce was agreed on between Israel and Islamic Jihad. So, only 2 hours separating the killing of Hamad Najim, 17, and 3 of his cousins in the Jabali refugee camp in the northern Gaza Strip, and the announcement of a ceasefire with Israel. Israel and the Palestinian armed group Islamic Jihad declared truce on Sunday after 3 days of heavy Israeli bombardment of the besieged Gaza Strip. Despite a flurry of Israeli air raids and Palestinian rocket launches until the last minute, the truce began at 11:30 p.m. local time on Sunday, 2030 GMT, and has so far held. According to Palestinian Health Ministry, 44 Palestinians, including 15 children, were killed, and at least 350 civilians wounded during Israel's 3-day preemptive strike. Yeah. The Israeli government is problematic. Very much so. Um, Singapore rules out same-sex marriage in review of archaic gay sex laws. Singapore's law that criminalizes sex between men is again under review, but the government insists the definition of marriage will remain protected. Section 377A, introduced in 1938 when the city-state was under British colonial rule, bans consensual same-sex sexual activity between men, and anyone found guilty of breaking the law can face up to 2 years in prison. The government is reviewing the archaic regulation, but is also considering how it can, quote-unquote, safeguard the current legal position on marriage from being challenged in the courts. Law and Home Affairs Minister K. Shanmugam said on Saturday, according to the Bloomberg. Same-sex marriages in Singapore are currently considered void, and Liao Yangfa, executive director of Singapore LGBTQ plus group Ugachaga, said there were no immediate plans to mount legal challenges to redefine marriage as it presently stands, according to Channel News Asia. The Catholic Church sided with the government and stated that while it supports LGBTQ plus people, its stance on marriage will never waver, i.e. it doesn't support LGBTQ plus people. So, Spain launches beach body positivity campaign to encourage women to reject stereotypes. So, apparently Spain's government is actively fighting against fat phobia. So, the government's equality ministry launched a summer campaign on Thursday encouraging women to reject, quote-unquote, stereotypes and aesthetical violence, a reference to social pressure some women feel to conform to beauty ideals. The slogan for the campaign is "Summer belongs to us too." So that's helpful. So, World Health Organization gets all homophobic. World Health Organization says gay men should reduce sexual partners to slow the spread of monkeypox. WHO Director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus also cautioned against stigma and discrimination related to the outbreak. It's kind of hard to do both. So the World Health Organization is calling on men who have sex with men to reduce the number of sexual partners to help slow the spread of monkeypox. That's like guaranteed to add to discrimination. Urged countries around the world to take steps needed to stop transmission. For men who have sex with men, this includes, for the moment, in reducing your numbers of sexual partners, considering sex with new partners, and exchanging contact details with any new partners to enable follow-up if needed. The focus for all countries must be engaging and empowering communities of men who have sex with men to reduce the risk of infection and onward transmission, to provide care for those infected, and to safeguard human rights and dignity. At the same time, he cautioned against stigma and discrimination, but like focusing on gay men like that kind of guarantees stigma and discrimination. Like, I don't know the nature of the reporting, and it's not helpful. Anyway, Suella Braverman wants schools to misgender trans kids and force them into a third bathroom. Attorney General Suella Braverman who will reportedly give a speech telling schools they have no legal requirement to honor trans people's pronouns or requests. Braverman, the government's chief legal advisor, will say on Wednesday that schools can ignore requests from trans children regarding their school uniforms and pronouns. Braverman and was oh god, this speech is cringe. A male child who stays in a school that they're a trans girl that they want to be female is legally still a boy or a male, and schools have a right to treat them as such under the law, she said at the time. They don't have to say, okay, we're going to let you change your pronouns or let you wear a skirt or call yourself a girl's name. Dear God. Yeah, UK is awfully anti-trans. Justice Secretary Dominique Raab to house trans prisoners based on genitals. Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominique Raab is reportedly planning to house trans prisoners based on their genitals. Story released by the Mail on Sunday quoted a host of sources and insiders who reported that Raab had developed a policy to ban trans women from women's prisons. The story was accompanied by photos of Karen White, a trans prisoner who was convicted of sexually assaulting women in prison. The crimes occurred several years ago, but White is still regarded regularly presented by the media as proof that trans women housed in women's prisons are predatory. Despite the scaremongering, according to the Ministry of Justice, there are 146 trans women prisoners in all of England and Wales as of April 2021. Of these, just 3 are housed in women's prisons, while the rest forced to remain in men's facilities. Giving slightly more detail, a spokesperson from the Ministry of Justice told the newspaper that there would be changes to the policy when it came to trans prisoners, and that distinction would be based on genitals. Exceptions would be made if signed off by a minister. They said, having reviewed arrangements in July, the Justice Secretary directed changes so trans prisoners with male genitalia are not housed with other biologically born women in female prison estate unless specifically signed by a minister. Dear God. Once confirmed by the new government in September, it would be implemented as soon as possible. I hate everything. Right-wing figures are among the most influential groups pushing anti-trans agendas in the UK media, according to an eye-opening report. A report published by the Global Action for Trans Equality, GATE, mapped how the anti-trans movement is mobilizing in the UK. GATE said the report, part of the advocacy organization's broader mapping project, focused on the UK as one of the global hotspots where anti-trans movements have enjoyed increased efficacy in the last few years. The project mapped 368 anti-trans and linked actors in the UK and internationally, including figures in the right-leaning media, UK religious right and US religious and neoconservative right, trans exclusionary feminists, LGBT actors, and the alt/far right. The report analyzed the 1,036 relationships between these figures and how they interacted with each other. Their relationships could be through activities such as employment campaigning, interviews and panels, or co-authorship and collaborating in legal funds. The report found that anti-trans movements in the UK have become significantly larger, more visible, and more effective since 2015/2016 to the present day. Gates said the organization saw a dramatic increase in anti-trans content and activity in UK media and politics starting in 2015. It found there's an important driving role played by right-wing groups, and that the actors in these groups interlink with much of the UK media, commentariat, wider political class, and traditional conservative groups. They were also linked with parts of the left-leaning media and political class. Vast majority of these people were not producing content about trans issues prior to 2015. The report found many of these people share a zero-sum conception of rights, even though many seem to have quote-unquote very different or even radically opposing political agendas in many respects. This conception included the predominant belief quote-unquote for one community's rights to be respected and protected, another community must be excluded from rights and protections. Gate found all groups in the mapping were generally anti-intersectional and critical of younger social movements. And obviously they believe they're the true victims of an excessively liberal new status quo. Change is scary and bad. Yeah. Bert also said decenter and disrupt, and speak past the core messages of anti-gender actors, which rely strongly on fear-based messaging and anger-based mobilization. Yeah. And naturally, as LGBT Alliance files legal bid to ban trans women from drag shows, on May 2021, lesbian drag king Jess Hoyle sought to hold a drag night for quote-unquote adult human females at the Peel Hotel in Launiston in the Australian island of Tasmania. In a submission apparently written by the LGBT Alliance Australia on Hoyle's behalf, it explained, "We do not want participants who are male-bodied humans attending regardless of how they identify. Lesbians are homosexuals. That this is an event to celebrate lesbians and, in particular, provide a safe venue without unwanted presence, attention, or aggression of male-bodied people. Only aggression of female-bodied people. I am a robot." Dear God, this is just cringe. So what, they're gonna have like 5 people in this show? Like, bunch of anti-trans talking points. Government advisors say ministers' plans will not deliver an accessible railway. So the government advisors on accessible transport have told ministers they do not believe their proposals for reforming the rail system will be enough to deliver an accessible railway. The government plans will not be sufficient to deliver cultural change or an accessible railway. Instead, there will have to be a real commitment to change that permeates every level of Great British Railways, the overarching body that will run the rail system. So, British government being awful. Shock. So, as well as a consistent thing in the UK. MP's silence on death's evidence shows they have abandoned benefit claimants. Campaigners spent years exposing the deaths of countless benefit claimants have spoken this week about the abysmal failure of MPs who refused to question the Minister for Disabled People about research linking her government with those tragedies. 30 years of evidence linking Department for Work and Pensions with the deaths of hundreds and probably thousands of disabled claimants, but despite Disability News Service alerting all members of the Commons Work and Pensions Select Committee to the timeline 2 days ahead of the evidence session with Chloe Smith, not one of them chose to ask her about it. The committee's chair of Labour's Sir Stephen Timms, himself a former DWP welfare reform minister, had been alerted to the timeline 5 days before the evidence session, and at least one committee member, and probably more, had known about it for more than 3 weeks. The timeline currently features more than 300 pages of evidence of systemic failings by DWP, but the committee kept silence on this evidence despite questioning the minister for nearly 2 hours last Wednesday. Dave Smith, whose brother James Oliver features in the timeline, says the committee's failure to question the minister about the evidence raises questions as to how reliable and trustworthy the Commons Committee actually are. His terminally ill brother was denied personal independence payments following a face-to-face assessment that took place in his flat in Hastings. The Smith said that DWP not only refused him for benefits, but were quite happy knowing he was dying in the filthiest of basement flats where he wasn't fit enough to clean. Dear God. His last words were, I'm effing terminally ill, and I still don't qualify for personal independence payment. Yeah. F the UK. They're, no, awful. Two campaigners are seeking High Court's permission to challenge the government's refusal to ensure disabled people can evacuate safely from high-rise blocks of flats in emergencies. So this is a problem everywhere. It's a problem in the UK. It's a problem in America. It's a problem everywhere. So what it is they don't make escape routes for disabled people. They don't. They just don't. So, Home Secretary Priti Patel rejected the recommendation on the grounds of practicality, proportionality, and safety, even though Prime Minister Boris Johnson had promised to implement all the recommendations from the first phase of the inquiry. The rejection came even though those who responded to a consultation on the PEEP's proposal overwhelmingly supported their introduction. And naturally they're like, yeah, we'll do it in a few places that are quote-unquote higher risk. Ableism abound. But finally, we have 4 gay rugby stories. So, which is the reasoning for this silly headline. So, rugby star Toby Rudolph opens up on fluid sexuality. So, Australian rugby player Toby Rudolph opened up about sexuality during an interview on the recent controversy around a Pride NRL jersey. Rudolph said he identified as he identified as heterosexual, but love is love, and I love to share it with everyone. Okay, so he might be that might not be fluid sexuality. That might just be he might be pan-romantic. So the Cronulla Sutherland Sharks player admitted he had kissed many men in the past and was comfortable enough in his own sexuality to do so. Sexuality is very fluid, he said. I've been out and kissed many gay men, kissed many straight women, and kissed many gay women. I'm not a one-stop shop. One of his favorite locations to party in Sydney after a match is all the gay bars across the city saying, I love dancing with my shirt off and getting down Universal on Oxford Street until 2 a.m. You could say I'm open to both genders, but I'm only sexually attracted to one of them. Now, yeah, this is something that happens too. But yeah, and this should be this description. This is what that definitely seems to be the case. So, gay footballer Thomas Beattie. Admittedly, this is football, not rugby. This one. The rest is rugby. I should have put this one before the rugby ones. Gay footballer Thomas Beattie deftly explains why the World Cup should never, ever be held in Qatar. When Thomas Beattie came out of this gay in June 2020, the world was still in the harshest period of the COVID-19 restrictions. Coming out was a strange experience for the now 35-year-old. He had spent so many years being afraid of who he was. Overnight, he realized that his fears were entirely unfounded. Of course, looking back, Beattie knows why he didn't come out sooner. Simply put, he wasn't ready. But by the time June 2020 rolled around, he was finally primed to be fully open about who he was. Obviously, there's the anti-gay stuff. Eventually retired from football after a serious head injury ended his career. But internalized homophobia stopped him from coming out, and sports is a celebration of diversity. It's something that brings communities together. It feels hypocritical to host these events, but then not have the same basic human rights across the board. That's where I stand on terms of not just the World Cup, but all sporting events. But this is his opinion. So, gay rugby pro comes out of retirement to tackle thinly veiled homophobia in sport. Rugby player Keegan Hurst is ending his retirement after 7 members of Manly Warringah Sea Eagles staged a boycott over an LGBTQ+ pride jersey. But on Monday, he announced he'll return to the sport, joining the Batley Bulldogs. Hurst, who became the first British professional rugby footballer to come out as gay in 2015, said his return to the sport was partially inspired by 7 members of Manly, a Sydney-based team, deciding they would rather forego a match than wear a top in the colors of the rainbow in July. A bitter row broke out in rugby after 7 Manly players refused to wear jerseys that celebrated inclusiveness instead foregoing a match against Sydney Roosters at Brooksvale Oval. Hasler later apologized on behalf of the club for the mishandled shirt launch, adding that the 7 players did not wear the jerseys as it conflicts with their cultural and religious beliefs. To Hurst, this was unacceptable. "Hey, at Sea Eagles, I'd be honored to wear your pride shirt," he tweeted at the time. Hitting back against the wave of homophobia, his tweets were met with Hurst told one troll, "Representation matters. What does it mean to gay kids who want to play rugby? They've just been showed they wouldn't be accepted by their peers." Which the sport isn't as inclusive as it likes to think it is. Symbolism matters. If it didn't, those players wouldn't care. And finally, ex-rugby pro says there's gayer things happening in changing rooms than rainbow-colored jerseys. So, former rugby league pro Keegan Hurst was... this is more Keegan Hurst. Product about the Seagulls Pride player boycott saga is that I know it goes on in real life changing rooms, and a lot of it would be seen as much gayer than a rainbow jersey. Hurst was one of the first British professional rugby league players to come out as gay in 2015 while he was playing for the Batley Bulldogs. After the indefinite suspension of the 2020 RFL Championship season due to COVID-19, he retired from the games altogether. After he weighed in on the Manly row, Hurst received a predictable set of anti-LGBTQ+ responses. I know, this is a shock, with some suggesting that the community is forcing its belief on players. Hurst emphasized that LGBTQ+ identities aren't beliefs, and that if religious beliefs meant someone wouldn't play with black players, we would say, would we say it's the religion? It's okay. No, we wouldn't. So, yeah, witness the gayness of the delightful gayness of rugby. No, there should be a lot more inclusion, and this is the last story too. You're so mean, Jinx Tiamat, for doing the thing that I made totally available to do on my stream. Anyways, yeah, I'm not sure what more to say about this. I'm gonna play the ending, and then I'm going to go into some League of Legends after this. So, enjoy the ending.
Justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Sex and race, because they are easy, visible differences, have been the primary ways of organizing human beings into superior and inferior groups, and into the cheap labor on which this system still depends.
No, you all tell me to go and hide my tail between my legs. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation. And you all treat me this way? What the fuck's wrong with you all?
We want no more segregation. We will accept no more discussion of segregation. And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
Freedom is merely privilege extended unless enjoyed by one and all.
All we are doing with this bill is allowing two people who love each other to have that love recognised by way of marriage. That is all we are doing.
I speak not for myself, but for those without voice can be heard. Those who have fought for their rights, their right to live in peace.
Sometimes, especially in this body, I feel as though if Christ himself walked through these doors and said what he said thousands of years ago, he would be maligned as a radical and rejected from these doors.